certain situations happening in households. There are instances of abuse, intimate partner abuse, childhood abuse. Some marriages were already on the rocks before this pandemic, and now spouses are forced to stay in a space with a person they may not even like. Hello, somebody. We're being real tonight. That this pandemic is forcing us to deal with people that we may not want to deal with 24/7. And there is no escape. You have to face it. So that's one aspect of it. Parents, not only do parents have to become teachers, even though they're not certified, then they also have to balance their jobs, if their jobs are now remote, or if they are furloughed or laid off during this time. So the balance of that and the tension. Another thing is, many of us do like to cook, but many of us have not cooked as much as we have been during this season. So it has caused us to stretch in many different ways. I know for myself, I've had to come up with many different recipes. I'm tired of chicken, so I need to figure out some other things to add to our diet. Eating unhealthy during this time is so many triggers that have come forth during this COVID-19. And the reality is that with us not being in church, that's also a grief process. Okay, you do go through a season of grief. One aspect of it is this, is that you're not able to dwell and fellowship with those who you normally fellowship with. But another side of it is that sometimes church is the only thing that people have. Church is that safe space. Church is that safe environment. So when it's taken away from you, what else do you have? So there's a sense of grief there. Those who are extroverted are struggling, and even those who may be introverted and need just a little communal presence are also struggling during this time. So our stress levels are up. Okay, there's a lot of stress happening, which impacts our mental health and our mental stability. Now, in order to deal with the trauma of this COVID-19, you must be honest about how you really feel. You have to be honest about where you are. Do not try to present one way and on the inside you are falling to pieces. One thing about trauma therapy is that we as clinicians lead people to accept their reality. Their behaviors cannot change. How they think cannot change if they are not honest about how they really feel. So when persons are going through grief, loss, I take them through a process of the 5 stages of grief. I go through that process not just when someone has lost a loved one, but even if there is a divorce, a loss of a relationship, whatever type of loss may be presented in the room. I take those persons through the 5 stages of grief, and I'm going to go through them very quickly, and then I'll give you all a couple of tips that I would like to share with you to manage this season of trauma. The first stage is denial. When you deny your reality. The second stage is anger. You're angry about the situation. The third thing is bargaining. Maybe I should have done this. And if I did this, this may not have happened. Another stage is depression, having that low mood. Okay, not being able to function normally and not being able to participate in normal, pleasurable activities. And then another aspect is acceptance. Acceptance. Now, when I talk about acceptance, I'm not saying that everything is okay. When we say acceptance in the stage of grief, it does not suggest that yeah, we are happy about the loss that we have experienced. No, When we say acceptance, as we're going through the stages of grief, we're basically saying this hurts. This is my painful reality, but I can make it through this. This is my painful reality, but I can navigate through this and take the necessary steps. Now, throughout the stages of grief, it doesn't go in like chronological order, because sometimes within the stage of grief, you can begin with depression, and then depression can end up being anger. And then while you're being angry, you can end up in denial. And then after you deal with that sense of denial, then you end up bargaining. Then you may have accepted it for a season, and then you're right back to anger. So these stages of grief are interchangeable, really, and they happen, but you need to accept what stage you're in. And do not shame yourself if you're in a place of denial, anger, depression, or even bargaining. Do not try to push your feelings to the side. This is helpful to go through the necessary steps that you have to go through to process any type of tremendous loss. And none of these stages have a certain time limit. So take your time. You have to take your time throughout these stages, and do not rush the process, because if you rush the process, then you would not have fully been able to overcome the trauma or learn how to accept what's happening in the midst of trauma, or even being able to cope effectively in the midst of trauma. So I want to encourage you all to go through these stages of grief and take your time and accept where you are. Because once you accept where you are, then you can go down the road towards recovery. But do not try to go down the road of recovery too soon. So that's one thing about trauma therapy that we do, that people have to take their time. So take the necessary time. And when you take the necessary time, Christians, believers, men and women of God, it does not suggest that there is a lack of faith. It does not suggest that you are not anointed. It does not suggest that the Lord has released purpose and destiny over your life, that he hasn't done that. It doesn't mean that you're running away from him because you're dealing with these feelings. No, we have a high priest who's able to sympathize and empathize with our weaknesses. Oh, that's the beauty of it tonight, okay? That we do have a high priest. Now, as you go through these stages of grief, and I'm coming to a close, I want to give you all a couple of tips. One of the main things that we share with persons dealing with trauma is this: you have to remove yourself from the trigger. You have to remove yourself from whatever may be the trigger, which means you can't watch the news all day long. Now, it's okay to be aware about what's going on within your state, your region. Yes, it's good to have that knowledge. But having the news on morning, noon, and night is just not healthy for you. Okay, it causes fear to come. It causes you to relive that traumatic experience. So be very careful about watching the news all day long. Also, social media is another trigger, okay? When there's constant rest in peace on social media, when there's constant videos, constant pictures, constant statuses about this traumatic experience that we're all going through, it does trigger you. It causes anxiety, and it also causes depression. And if you don't manage this, you can go down a slippery, slippery slope. So be careful with what you're watching. Be careful with what you are receiving during this time. Now, if you do become anxious, I encourage you to breathe slowly and deeply. Inhale for 4 counts. Exhale for 6 to 8 counts. Another thing is listen to upbeat music. Music has authority. Music has power. Music has the ability to shift your atmosphere. So whatever type of music uplifts your spirit and uplifts your mood, I encourage you to listen to that type of music. Another thing is exercise. You have to keep moving during this time. You can't sit on the couch all day. You have to do something, even if it's just walking around your kitchen or your dining room. Do something. Get up and do something. It helps your mind. Participate in an activity that you like, whatever it is. Because since you may not have had the opportunity to pursue that activity, you have a little more time now. So pursue something that you like. And don't shame yourself for pursuing that activity. Another thing is take time to center yourself. It's okay to just be quiet. It's okay to put your phone on do not disturb. It's okay to not answer that phone call or answer that text message. It's okay to just say, look, this is my me time. This is my time for self-care. Okay, the best way to take care of yourself during this time is to worry about yourself. It's not selfish to do that. It's okay to say, look, I need a minute. And of course, as Christians, as believers, we do believe in the power of prayer. We do believe that worship makes a difference. And also add those spiritual disciplines into this approach to handle your trauma. So during this time, I'm just giving you just a couple of tips today. Some practical tips that you can use, and it can change your mindset. It could even change your behaviors. So remember, acknowledge where you are. It's okay to say, this is a lot. Go through the various stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, and then implement some of these practical tools of deep breathing, exercise, meditation, limit your time watching TV as well as social media, and watch your mood start to change, okay? Watch your mood start to change and be open to go through this process of wholeness as well as recovery. So God bless you and God keep you. And once again, I'm just so honored to share with you on this night. Amen.
Amen.
I'm thankful for Pastor Counts being here to share with us today. We're thankful for his insight and the gift that he is navigating and helping us to deal with addressing the trauma that comes with this season. At this time, we're preparing to move. We are going to the 5th Episcopal District of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, where we will find the first female elected presiding prelate of the CME Church. She is one who is extremely gifted. She leads us in CPE. She represents clinical pastoral education at its absolute best, and we're thankful that Bishop Teresa Jefferson-Snorton was available to share with us today. And I again want to say thank you to Bishop Teresa Jefferson-Snorton for sharing with us and allowing this moment to be a part as she shares with us today. And so at this time, without any further ado, I'm going to switch to Bishop Teresa Jefferson-Snorton.
Hello, how is everyone this evening?
Fine, fine. You?
I want to thank Pastor Counts for his presentation, which gives me a natural segue into specifically talking about the grief that pastors bear during this particular season. I believe that most of you have logged on because in some way you see yourself as a caregiver or someone who is experiencing grief, or someone who will be called upon by those who are grieving. So we're going to talk about pastors. You need to grieve too, as well as reinforce the message so that during this time of crisis, but even moving forward, people understand that pastors also grieve. Pastors grieve too. So, Reverend Dennis, do you have my PowerPoint up?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sharing now.
All right. So as we begin to think about, I'm going to basically cover three things. Why the grief of pastors, I believe, is unique. Second, we're going to talk about the consequences of grief, particularly from a caregiver perspective. And then finally, we'll be talking about some things that you can actually do to attend to your own grief. Can you make that full screen? Okay, thank you. And you can move to the next slide. So what's really important as we think about pastors and the grief that we bear is that when you're a caregiver, and I use the word pastor, but you might be a minister, you might be on ministerial staff, you may be a caregiver, you may be a parent or someone who's responsible for others. But if we think about the role of a pastor, someone who has that ministerial function, we are really in a unique position. As pastor, we are expected. It is the expectation that we are available to attend to the needs and the spiritual development of parishioners. When something like this happens, like COVID-19, car accident, heart attack, unexpected death, marital problems, child in trouble, people still turn to the pastor or the preacher or a minister they just might happen to know. And the expectation is, you will help me. You have something that I need. So pastors inherently walk around. It doesn't matter whether you're at the church or not. And all of you can identify if you're in the grocery store, the barber shop, or just walking down the street and people see you and know you as pastor, that carries with it the expectation that you have the ability and willingness to attend to their needs and their spiritual development. But also, pastors and people who are in charge or responsible for ministries also carry a priestly role. We are expected to carry forward the traditions of the church, the rituals of the church, leading worship, offering sacraments, praying with folks, sharing scripture. We're expected not just to listen to their needs, but also direct them to priestly activity, through priestly activity that help reassure them of their connection with God and that God really cares. And so both of these roles have been complicated through this pandemic because of social distancing, with the likelihood of infection. Our additional limitations have been imposed upon us that we did not plan for, that we have never had to do before, that complicate both our ability to be a pastor, to be present, to be with, as well as to be priest. I can remember the outcry when I said to the 5th district pastors that they could not have in-person services. It was like, how can this be? This is terrible. This is what we do. How can I not do what I'm supposed to do? And of course, we had to get creative very quickly and find other means of letting people know that there was still a pastor available. There was still a priest still available. But pastor and priest are just two of the roles. A third role that we cannot overlook is that the pastor is a person. The pastor is also a person. So while you're looking out for everybody else, while you're preparing Bible study, while you're trying to figure out how to do communion or how to do that graveside service, you also have people in your life that are meaningful and important and significant to you. I told my husband just yesterday, when I wake up every day, one of the first things on my list is to call my mother, family of origin. I live in Alabama. My mother's in Virginia. She lives alone. I have a whole lot of concerns about her. And so my concern about her needs, what's happening in her world, dominate some of my psychic and emotional energy and space. We also have relationships that predate our ministry. We have childhood friends, people we grew up with, folks we live next door to, some of whom we have mostly, whom we may have kept in touch with. And so as Pastor Counts was saying, as you scroll through those Facebook rest in peace, some of them might just kind of punch you in the gut because you know that person. You met them at a conference. You went to a vacation Bible school with them. Those of us who are married or in relationships currently have a marital family. Those people we live with every day and have to make decisions about who's going to the grocery store and how much money do we have and whose turn is it to wash dishes and are you feeling okay today? So we have those people in our day-to-day lives, as well as extended family members, those networks of sisters and cousins and real and pretend aunties and uncles that we are concerned about. We have our own support system, whether it's our mentors or our colleagues and our network of friends. So at the end of the day, the pastor is worried about a whole lot of people. There are simply a whole lot of things demanding our energy and our attention. And as Pastor Count said, you have to pay attention to how you are feeling. Because if you don't, then feelings that are part of one sphere may impact your ability to function in another sphere. So if you're preoccupied and worried about, let's say, your own parents, that's going to take some energy away from the time that you have to prepare a sermon. And so you have to figure out how you balance all of that. How do you keep all of these, literally all the balls in the air? How do you keep it going? So this unique role of pastors is critically important. And I think what's really important is that you take the time every day to do a check-in with each one of them. How am I doing as a pastor? How's my energy? How am I feeling about that work? Where am I being challenged? How am I feeling about my priestly work? By literally taking your own temperature or your own pulse. How am I doing in my relationships? Is there something I need to put on the back burner so I can attend to something that's more pressing or more urgent is really critical. So this unique role, I believe, tends to make the grief of pastors when it happens much more consequential. So if we would go to the next slide. So first, let me just say, grief, and most of us know this, but grief is a natural process. Many of us we feel like grief is something that's out of the ordinary, but grief is an indication of our ability to care, to be attached, to feel connected. And so it's a natural process that follows the loss of people, relationships, even items, things that we have. We have one church here in the 5th where the church was totally destroyed on Easter Sunday by a tornado. Yes, it can be rebuilt, but there's grief that goes with the loss of that familiar space. Grief also can be about the loss of a vision, a dream, an ambition, something that we had envisioned. We're hearing about our graduates of 2020 grieving because they won't get to do that historic march across the stage. For those of us who did it 50 years ago, we may say, oh, well, it was no big deal. You won't even remember it. But for them in this moment, it's a moment of grief. So first of all, attending to your grief means accepting that it's natural. It's something that is supposed to happen. And for me, this is really reinforced in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, where Jesus said, blessed are they that mourn. We often want the comfort, but we fail to understand that our comfort only comes when we are willing to do the mourning. when we are willing to do the grieving. You can check the next slide. So what's really important for us as pastors is to really acknowledge grief is not just for certain people. We can be seduced into thinking that because we are the leader, because we are the one that's been trained, because we're the one that's responsible, we are not entitled to grief. No, grief is something that everybody experiences regardless of your role or title. Grief is not a lack of faith. All too often we hear people want to cover over experiences of loss by saying, well, God won't put any more on you than you can bear, or the Lord knows better than us, as if to suggest that our grief somehow diminishes our faith. But back to that text, blessed are they that mourn. It takes courage to grieve, and you can grieve because you have faith. You don't grieve because you don't have faith. Grief is not weakness. As pastors, ministers, we are people too, and we have the capacity to express sorrow the same way we have the capacity to express joy. So it is not a weakness or a sign of weakness. And then last, grief is not a process that can be denied. You can delay it, you can ignore it, you can suppress it, but grief will make itself known eventually. And often it's at the least expected times if you have not attended to it. You can move to the next slide. So the core of what I want to say to us today is, because of what we're going through, and because so much is happening all at the same time, and what we're experiencing we've never experienced before, the particular grief of pastors is subject to a phenomenon called compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is a unique way in which the psyche and the mind and the body and the spirit just say, whew, this is just too much. Compassion fatigue happens when you get overwhelmed or you continuously have to display empathy and care in rapid succession, or it's compounded by a series of overlapping events. And that's exactly what we're experiencing. Every day, there's a new person infected. Every day, there's a new death to grieve. Every day, there's a new challenge. If it's not a death, it's the loss of a job. If it's not the loss of a job, it's the inability to manage life. It just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. And every day, people are still looking at the pastor to do something. It's very easy to become vicariously traumatized. Nothing might not be happening to you. Your house may be okay. You may have enough toilet paper and food. You may have enough money, but simple exposure to this continuous and rapid succession of grief and loss and trauma that other people who are a part of your life and your ministry and your community, it has an impact on you. And that can easily be underestimated and devalued. Secondary traumatic stress is real. You don't have to be in the accident to have empathy for the pain that people are experiencing. I've not worked in the healthcare setting now for almost 20 years, but for about 20 years before that, I was an active chaplain. And I remember still walking into intensive care units where people were on ventilators. And I found myself reliving some of the trauma of standing at the bedside as a pastor with a family feeling helpless. And those were memories from 20 years ago, but that secondary traumatic stress is a real thing. And we as pastors can stuff it away, ignore it, discount it, and we end up then, next slide, having to deal with the consequences consequences and the symptoms of compassion fatigue. Emotionally, we'll begin to find ourselves on a slippery slope where we'll just feel helpless. We will experience a decrease in pleasure. Our favorite show, we don't want to watch it. Our favorite music, we don't want to listen to it. We'll find ourselves dealing with anxiety. The phone rings, it just generates a startle response. Oh Lord, what's happened now? Physically, you may not be able to sleep at night, or you may wake up during the night. You may even have nightmares or bad dreams or troubling dreams. Or you may be at the opposite end of the spectrum where you have no energy and all you want to do is shut down and sleep. You may even experience physically the loss of appetite. So attending to one's own emotional and physical well-being is really critical when you know that tomorrow there probably will be something else, another grief, another trauma, another difficult thing you have to figure out to keep the ministry going. Spiritually, if you don't attend to these things, you'll find yourself wrestling with a loss of meaning. What's the point? Why do it? It's not going to make a difference. Or even a loss of focus. You sit down and you try to do a sermon and you can't even put a thought together. You have a loss of focus. Or even sometimes negativity and cynicism may set in. They don't care. Nothing's going to help anyway. And of course, that ends up with a sense of hopelessness. And the worst thing that we can do as leaders and even as individual believers is to lose our sense of hope. And that erodes our spiritual connection to something that is beyond even COVID-19. And that's the God we love and serve. So these are the symptoms and the consequences that we have to pay attention to. But the good news is, next slide, if you pay attention to these, then there are some things that you need to do. And this is really a repeat of what we've already heard, so it doesn't hurt to have things reinforced. Personally, do all you can right now to reduce your stress. Things that do not matter. If you're a type A personality like I am, where everything matters, you need to sit down and have a talk with yourself and say everything does not matter right now. Some things during this pandemic just aren't that important. Why stress out over everything when just waking up to another day of pandemic is enough stress by itself? So figuring out how to reduce your stress, making up your mind that there's some projects that you will need to put off right now. There's some things that you cannot do right now. There's some ways. I've been saying to my pastors, if you're doing virtual worship, why are you trying to do a whole hour and a half, 90-minute service? You are stressing yourself for no reason. 20 minutes is more than enough. Reduce your stress. Get adequate sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Adequate sleep, nutrition, and exercise. For me, that means at 8:30, I turn my phone on silent. That's hard for me because my children live in another state, my mother lives in another state, but I've come to understand that if I'm going to be any good to them tomorrow, I've got to get rest tonight. Nutrition, okay, potato chips, candy, all the stuff that I like. I'm having to monitor how much I'm eating and make sure that I'm paying attention to the fact that my body, in order to have a good immune system, my body needs good food. Exercise, move around, walk around the house, walk around the yard, do something to keep moving, as we've heard. Socially, we need to make sure that we understand healthy boundaries. Now is a time that you can and should say no to some things. Everybody wants to do a Zoom call. I can't be on every Zoom conference. I've had to say no to some things that I was very interested in. And by having healthy boundaries, it enables you to have that balance. And the balance is important because after all, if you're a pastor, you've got your church, and all the members. You've got the business functions of the church. You've got the community that your church is a part of. Then you got your own family. And then if you're Methodist, you got all the stuff the bishops and the elder want you to do. So maintaining a sense of balance is facilitated by setting up some boundaries. How much time you have to devote, or how much time you will, or what kinds of things do you need to say no to or back away from now. And last, socially, is delegating. Some of us think we are supermen and superwomen, but there are people in our lives who can help us. There may be some things right now that you have not been willing to let go of, that it may be important for you to delegate to someone else in your house or in your congregation, because you cannot do it all and stay well and healthy. Last, meditation, prayer, those spiritual disciplines. And I add this one, theological reflection. This is challenging even our basic theology. What does this really mean? What is God saying? And we can be pithy and say, oh, well, God is punishing humanity because that's what God's been doing since the fall. Or, we can come up with these quick summations, but really to emerge from this with all the grief we're experiencing, with a new, if not a new, a revived sense of spirituality, means you have to take the time to reflect theologically, to wrestle with your own theodicy, your own belief about hope and how hope emerges, your own belief about how God's revelation comes, whatever is in your spirit. It can't just be because you got to have a sermon. It's got to be because God is working in you to make you a better person as well. So, last couple of slides. The grieving pastor, and I contend we're all grieving. You need rest. You need downtime. You need solitude, some quiet time when the TV, the radio, the cell phone, all that. Refueling. There may be some internal resources you need to build up during this time. For someone like me who likes to get things done, patience is one of those internal resources that I'm trying to cultivate and nourish and refuel myself. Retooling, there may be some external resources. It may be that you've never read and studied the book of Lamentations, and you may say, hey, I need to read that. Or you may not have studied the demographics of your community to really understand what the statistics are telling you. You may need to retool and go get some more information. Restoration. Restoration is giving yourself permission to revise your vision of yourself and your vision of ministry. We will never go back to normal, but restoration will bring us back to a new normal. You have to take time as well as give yourself permission to create that new normal. And then last, I would say reconciliation. If your grief experiences, if your pastoral experiences have broken you, that's not a bad thing. A bad thing is to ignore the brokenness, the uncertainty, the doubt. And this is a time where getting some consultation, mentor, spiritual director, therapist, I call them rent-a-friend, whatever you need to reconcile yourself back to the original call where God called you forward to be one of his pastors and priests. So next slide. 1 Thessalonians 4 tells us, brothers and sisters, we don't want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death. We cannot deny that COVID-19 is killing folks, that people we know and love are dying, and we can't do anything to stop it. But we don't want you to grieve like other people who have no hope. It's not that we don't want you to grieve. We don't want you to grieve like people who have no hope. We have hope. And it is that hope that will carry us forward. Last slide. And so I'll close with this passage of scripture, which I know is familiar to all of us. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Let your hope be in the Lord, and may your strength and your grief be renewed. May your weariness be remedied by your faith. But above all, don't ignore your own grief. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bishop Jefferson-Snorton. Thank you so much for that presentation. Certainly to all of you who have questions, you can feel free to post those in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get them to our presenters. We're moving now. We're coming closer to the DMV. We're going to the Reverend Diane Hugger, who is a chaplain at the Washington Hospital Center, who will talk to us just for a few moments on the thought, I'm here for you, being present when you can't physically be there. That's been one of the most difficult things during this season. And so I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Diane Hugger.
Greetings to all of you. Greetings, Bishop Snorton. It's good to be in your presence. As a student of CPE, I'm ever grateful for your contributions that you have made to the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. And greetings to all of you. This is a very difficult subject. I've struggled with preparing for you, and I begin by maybe doing some self-reflection. Let me make a correction. I am no longer a chaplain at the Washington Hospital Center. I am a hospice chaplain with Capital Caring and Health, and I have been in that capacity for a while. The chaplains for Capital Caring, because of COVID, have been taken out of the field. We are no longer permitted to go into the homes and to go into the facilities. And that shook my theology a little bit, because I consider myself a first offender. If you ever needed the Lord before, surely when you're stricken with COVID, you need to see the presence of the Lord. You need a chaplain. But I had to step back and do some theological reflection of my own. I had to ask myself and reflect on my call to the ministry. What is my relationship to God? And who am I in the body of Christ? And in those periods of reflection, I came to know that the ministry, my call to the ministry, has always belonged to the one who called me. In John, the 10th chapter, Jesus repeatedly says, I am the good shepherd. He says that his sheep follow him because they know his voice. The ministry of presence means moving in close to listen, laying down our own defenses and agendas, and offering up empathy and compassion instead. I say that to say it's very difficult to want to be in the presence, to want to be able to comfort our loved ones. I hear Bishop Snorton talking about her mom being miles away, her children being miles away. And that's a scenario that a lot of us find in this COVID environment. We want to be in church, but we can't be there. Pastors want to be able to see their members, but they can no longer be there. So how do we maintain in the presence and not really be able to see those that we are ministering to? And all of us are called to minister. Some of us are caregivers, taking care of our parents. Some of us are caregivers, taking care of the children in the house. Some of us are pastors and chaplains. We are all ministers. We are all called to be ministers. But the thing that we must remember, and one of the things that they taught us going through the CPE process, is that the appointment, the divine appointment, the care has already been established by the Good Shepherd, who is always present. He's always there. He's at the appointment before we get there. And even though we are not able now, because of this virus, to knock on the door and to see and to touch and to feel folk that we care about, the Good Shepherd is there. And in order for us to really to embrace this concept, we have to come back to our sheephood. We are all sheep needing the guidance and the presence of the Good Shepherd. Sometimes, as church leaders and pastors, we read this passage and it says, I am the Good Shepherd. But you know, deep inside, we say, okay, I am. No. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. And we are all sheep. We are all sheep. Our first name is sheep. Might be a sheep pastor, sheep chaplain, sheep caregiver, but we are all standing on the ground of the sheep. And the sheep need the Good Shepherd. The shepherd is here, there, and everywhere, even when we can't be there. Even when we can't be there. And because he is the Good Shepherd, he has already put some tools in place for a time such as this, which allows us to be in the visual presence, but not in the physical. Not in the physical. Churches are live streaming now, even though you can't be in the sanctuary. God has provided another sanctuary in the form of live streaming. People are staying connected with conference call, Instagap, and all kinds of things. So he is providing us a way, giving us a way to be present even when we can't be there physically. So what does that require of us? What does that kind of force us to do? The passage says, the sheep hear his voice. It doesn't say the sheep see him. They hear the voice. That means that the Good Shepherd is listening. It causes us as caregivers to listen more. Not be so concerned about being seen, but to listen more to one another. What is being said in the conversations that we have with our loved ones? What is really being said around the table when we're now forced to eat together and conversation is going on? Can we see the need? Can we hear the need? Even though we may not be able to see it. Those of us who are trying to care for family. I live in a 55 plus building, and a lot of the persons, my neighbors, are very independent. They have been able to navigate and take care of themselves. Their children come to visit before COVID. But now they can't come. Some of them are coming anyway. They're coming anyway. If they have to gown up, if they have to put on goggles, if they have to put on gloves, if they have to modify the number of times they come to see their parents, they come anyway. And in that short span of time that they're able to visit, they're listening and hearing in a different way than they normally would. They're listening for mom say, you know, I'm not sleeping, I'm worried. That puts them in tune with what they might need to do more for mom. Most of the counties have what they call a telecheck, where you can register your loved one on a list, and someone from the Department of Aging will call your loved one and check in and say, how you doing? And a lot of times in that space, your parents will tell a stranger more than they will tell you. What can we do as a church? We can do the buddy system. Can't go over and knock on Sister Sarah's door, but I can do a buddy chat. Hey sis, how you doing? You know, oh, I'm kind of worried. I'm not sleeping. Okay, you're listening for where they are. You are seeing where they are, reassuring them. But now you're going to go back to the pastor or to their son or their daughter and say, listen, you know, I talked to mom today. And she sounded like she was a little bit down. A little down. That triggers me to get on the phone and call and say, hey mom, what's going on? How you doing? Hearing your voice may be the thing that will lift her spirit. What can we do? It's easy to fall into the trap sometimes, pastors, to say in this environment, I'm standing here and I'm preaching to the pew. I feel inadequate. Is anybody listening? Was it worth doing this word and this sermon and having all of this done? If you put yourself in the realm as being a sheep, you will know, you will hear from God who speaks with you, who gives you a word. And first of all, say, don't worry about it. Because not only am I in this sanctuary with you, I am at home with the rest of my sheep as well. Bishop Snorton touched on this in your spiritual life, all of us. Now that we are in this still time, the word says, be still and know that I am God. Know that I am God for you individually. Find time, make time for meditation. And when you meditate, when you meet the shepherd as a sheep, come needing to hear something. Come needing to be fed. Come needing to be guided. It is me, oh Lord. I need to hear from you. I need to be fed by you. This is what I'm thinking in my mind, God. I don't know, even if in this space today, if my faith is even where it should be. We cannot hurt God's feeling. You ever heard that your arms are too short to box with God? He already knows what's going on in your head. But as Reverend Couch said, when we put it out in the atmosphere, when we put it out in the atmosphere and say, I'm not feeling it today, God. I'm feeling far distant from you. I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it. I need you to come to me. I need to feel your presence, even though I can't see you, even though I can't touch you. And if we do these things, and if you do it earnestly and prayerfully, God will speak to you. Every Everything that we used to do now is turned upside down. You don't have to preach from the lectionary no more. You can preach from your heart. Preach from what God has laid on you to say, knowing that the good shepherd has already gone before and spoken it unto you. You just have to trust it enough to hear from the shepherd and do what the shepherd's will is. When you come as sheep, when we come on common ground as sheep, you know, if I'm up here and you down here, you're not going to always be able to relate to me. But when we are all coming into the sheepfold, needing a shepherd, then that gets to be a little bit different. The interaction with us together gets to be a little bit different. A little bit different. It's possible to administer to the persons that we love, even in the midst of COVID, because God has given us some tools. What would it be like to set aside a time and say, you know what? I'm gonna have a Zoom lunch with somebody, one of my friends from church or one of my parishioners. I'm gonna schedule Zoom lunch. I'm gonna be at my table eating, and they're gonna be at their table, and we're just gonna kick back. And we're just gonna talk. I'm gonna listen. We're gonna feed into each other. The next time that you meet someone else, it might be Zoom dinner. Let me sit down with your family. Girl, I didn't know you had all those children. Man, what's going on with you? I'm being with you. I'm sheep to sheep. We are together and we're just enjoying each other's company. On Sunday morning, it don't have to be an hour. It could be a 20-minute talk. And then we talk about, as a congregation, what we gonna do for the rest of the week? What are we gonna do for the rest of the week? What are your concerns? What's concerning you? Is it all well? What do you need? Is there somebody that we need to invite to a Zoom meeting? Do we need to have Zoom Bible trivia night? So these things are in our hand. And for our seniors who may not have all of this electronic things and can't figure out what to do, you can still be with them via the old telephone. You can still pick up the phone and call and say, you know, Brother Joe, you know, this is what we talked about in church. You know, this is this is a song that was sung or something. You know, I'm sorry you couldn't be there, but I'm here with you today. Maybe we're going to have coffee. You get your cup, I got my cup. And I'm just going to share. Then we get back to the old-fashioned thing about writing. Take the time to sit down and write down. Write a card in your personal hand. Put it in snail mail. You ain't got to use email. Put it in snail mail and send it out. I took the time to write something to you. Sheep to sheep. Sheep to sheep. And it is difficult to minister, to not be. I have grandchildren who live around the corner from me. I do drive-bys. I just drive by in my car. Me and my husband, they wave, I wave. But you know, that got to be hurtful because I was so close, but I couldn't hug them. I couldn't do anything but that wave. So we found that Zoom was a little bit better because they could see me in my natural state. They could see the things in my house that they were familiar with seeing. So yes, it is difficult. It is hard to have the ministry of presence, to want to be with somebody, but not be there. But if you think about that good shepherd that goes before us, even in the midnight hour when we can't be there, when we are waking up wondering, how is mom and dad at home by themselves? The good shepherd is there. Sometimes you might have to put a security camera in their house, not to spy on them, so that you can see them and so that they can see you. It ain't all bad folk. God is still making a way. He's still creating because he wants us to be in communion and in community with one another, even in a time such as this. I didn't mean to give you no sermon, but I didn't know any other way to lay this before you than to remind you about the good shepherd who the sheep hear. He didn't say they see me, they hear me, and they know my voice. And as sheep, we have the opportunity to have that same relationship with the ones that we love, knowing that the good shepherd is already present. And then I will leave with you this serenity prayer, because we've got to let go of some things. It says, "This is another day, O Lord. I know not what it will bring." This is a morning prayer. "I know not what it will bring, but make me ready for whatever it may be. If I'm able to stand, help me stand up bravely. If I'm to sit still, help me to be quiet. If I am low, help me to do it patiently. And if I do nothing, let me do it gallantly." And also help me to the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, and courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Hugger, for that powerful presentation. Thank you. We're doing extremely well. Thank you to everyone who is participating. Next up, we are coming to the city of Baltimore. I want to present to you all, he laughs when I say it, but he's my boss. For about 8 or 9 years, I've worked with the Wylie Funeral Home, and it's been my pleasure to be able to serve families in death care. And he is the CEO and the president of Wylie Funeral Home, Baltimore City and Baltimore County. I want to present Mr. Brandon Wylie to lead us in sharing what can we do, celebrating our loved ones amid the COVID-19 protocols.
Thank you, Reverend Dennis. And thank you for this opportunity to share with such powerful speakers that have gone before me. We are truly living in difficult times dealing with COVID-19 and trying to find a place where social distancing doesn't equal emotional distancing. And trying to find that it's a process with the families that they're relatively not used to dealing with. We're used to having 300 or more people at our funerals and people stopping by the homes, bringing us food, and we're having cakes and different types of products brought to our home as well. But in the time of COVID-19, none of those things are possible. But there is a way. As many of the ministers and reverends have gone before me, that God will always make a way. He just has to provide us with the right tools to make us be able to communicate with our families. And some of those tools that he's given us are technology. Technology has truly driven this time in allowing families to close the gap between social distancing and emotional distancing. And along those gaps, we've noticed that during funerals, a lot of people are now live streaming their funerals. Even though they may be private and can only seat up to 10 people, we're live streaming and we're having more guests. Those 200 and 300 people are joining in and celebrating with them. We've noticed that many of the ministers and pastors of the church that support the family are now Zooming in and actually delivering their messages during the services. And so a lot of technology has come to play a large role in dealing with grief during COVID-19. Also, what we're doing here at the Wylie Funeral Home, we're uploading your program to our website. So that way people can go online and actually follow along with the program, right from their laptop or desktop. We're also allowing people to go on and sign the guest book digitally. That way they can leave messages and videos and pictures of their loved ones and their friends. So those are some of the ideas that have helped bringing technology and closing that gap. Also, we've been finding that families aren't having the opportunity to come close with their family when they're sick. A lot of family members who are dealing with loss right now in this time, they're not being able to go into the nursing homes or go into the hospitals. What they have to do is they have to wait till their loved one comes to the funeral home. So what we asked our families in the beginning, when we were around 250, 150, we were asking them to come to the funeral home and spend some time with your family, you know, prior to embalming and prior to the viewing, because we know you haven't had an opportunity to see them in almost weeks at a time. And that helped ease that anxiety that they were feeling, because a lot of this anxiety is driving the emotions with our families. So we like to close that gap as well. With arrangements, we're used to sitting right across and giving that support directly with our family, just like pastors are when they're counseling. But arrangements, we're only doing arrangements via Zoom, virtually, or phone. We've been noticing that a lot of family members do not have access to some of the communications that we have. They don't have iPads or internet. So the same situations that we notice that people are having in educational realms, families are having those same issues within their own homes, because they don't have a laptop, they don't have an iPad, they don't have a media device. So we feel like we have to pick up the phone and discuss how they want to celebrate their loved one's life over the phone. And then after that, we deliver packets to their home. And then when they bring in the clothing and different items and pictures, so bring those back in, they bring those documentation back with them. So it's finding that balance, you know, between safety and sympathy all the time. And how can we keep the essence of what celebrating the life is truly all about. As far as the viewings for the family, again, it's only 10 people in at a time. So we've ended up setting up the viewings within our lobby. We started doing it the traditional way, where we have everyone come into the room, but it was hard to keep count and also control a lot of people on the parking lot, because those people there on the parking lot, they probably haven't been out of the house in 2 to 3 weeks. And so when they get on the parking lot, it's a gathering, you know, it's celebration. It's, it's hugs. It's trying to find that emotion that they're missing by being at home. I think Bishop Teresa said it's called compassion fatigue, you know, and that's a lot what they are experiencing. And by them having an opportunity to deliver that compassion, they want to be on the parking lot. But we've also been having state troopers come through and threatening to close the funeral home and threatening to shut down the visitations. So we've had to come up with moving those visitations into the hallway. And by moving the family into the hallway, we can have the family set aside in a closed off room with a grief box by the door and a glass window where they can wave to the people as they come in. So it's more like a drive-through system where 10 people come into the funeral home, they visit with the deceased, then they visit with the grieving family, and then they exit the building. And so this has been working proficiently, but it took a lot of time to get here, you know, and a lot of anxiety between the funeral home and the family and people outside wanting to get in. But now that we have found the strength in our strategy, families and friends, they're starting to be like, man, this is great. You know, this is beautiful. You know, we have an opportunity to see our family. We have opportunity to see our friends. People feel comfortable coming into the building, knowing that everyone's following the right protocols and procedures, and everyone's wearing a mask and a proper protective personal equipment. All those things make and ease the tension and the anxiety. And then it becomes a level that they have steeled themselves to have this visitation, has steeled themselves to have this visitation, and the families now have a new level of resolve about the ceremony. As far as dealing with these emotions, we say that those people that have already had prearrangements in the past, the process does go a lot smoother because we already have the documentation. We already have that paperwork. So we don't have to worry about having to communicate through Zoom or through phone conversation. So prearrangement is very important. So if you haven't done it, that may be something that you might want to do. Or I suggest that you may want to contact your local funeral home and ask if they are willing to do prearrangements at this time. I had a family today. They said that they made arrangements before. They want to make prearrangements for their aunt next week because she's in the same nursing home as her other aunt that actually died of COVID-19. COVID-19 is very special because it's an assassin. So because COVID-19 is an assassin, your sympathy level is always going to be higher because it's almost like a sudden death or a homicide. Mama was healthy this day, mama's sick this day, mama's dead the next day. So it's one of those comforting situations where you really have to reach out to the families. You really have to open up those chat lines. You really have to communicate with them. Pick up your phone, send text messages. I think a lot of companies out here, such as DoorDash and Uber Eats and Grubhub, or maybe even your local caterers, send that food to the house. You don't have to be there. You know, I even hear families saying that people have lined up in cars and beeped the horn while they were in the house just to give them a level of support. Send flowers. Flower companies, if they're opening your area, send flowers. People are more than welcome to pick up the flower off the step, and they can read the card and understand the support that you're trying to render to them. Just support any way you can, you know, any way you can, because it's being received right now. We don't have any choice but to receive everything. And so open up your hearts, open up your minds, pick up your cell phones. That's the truest and realest way to connect with families. That completes my how to support families at COVID-19. I won't go any further. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Dale, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you all for participating today. Each of you has been a tremendous blessing. Thank you to all of our presenters for sharing on today. I did not see any questions in the chat, but certainly, again, thank you to all of our presenters. And I want us to be reminded that during this season, as we navigate grief and as we navigate the uncertainties as it relates to COVID-19, that we don't have to face it alone. Yes, we have to deal with social distancing, but we do not have to go through this season alone. But we can tap into the resource of one another, and that we can continue to be a support for each other and continue to stand with each other. Again, thank you to all of our presenters for availing yourselves and for sharing your wisdom. Pastor Counts, Bishop Jefferson-Snorton, Reverend Hugger, Mr. Wylie, thank you all so very much for sharing with us today. And certainly it is my sincerest prayer that those of you who have tuned in have been helped in some way, that your spirit has been lifted that you have been encouraged, that you have been inspired, that even as we navigate this uncharted territory, we recognize that there is still nothing that's too hard for the God that we serve, that there is nothing that God cannot do for us, that there is no mountain God can't help us to climb, that there's no river that God can't help us to cross. And so I want you all to continue to be in prayer one for another, even as we navigate this season. Would you join me as we close in prayer? Gracious Father, thank you for this time together. Thank you for the information that has been shared. Thank you for each presenter. Thank you for the spirit with which they have guided us on today. And God, it is our prayer that you would give us exactly what we need to help us navigate grief during this season. We pray, God, that you would continue to remind us that you are still the God of all comfort. Continue to remind us that you are still a very present help in all of our times of trouble. Now, God, it is our prayer that your angels would go before us, that your spirit would go with us, that your favor would cover us, and that your love would forever surround us. God, we love you, we honor you, and we adore you. And we pray that even now, you would give us peace, which you said would surpass all understanding. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen and thank God. I pray that all of you would go in the peace of the Lord, and that the peace of the Lord would go with you all. This recording will be made available later on this evening. God bless you. God keep you is my prayer. Bye-bye.
Amen.